and get started. I'm so glad to see you all. This is great. You actually took it seriously when I said this was required. There's nothing I can do to you, you know. Nice to know. So this week we're going to talk about some of the special services that can be offered to your students. And I think I put this session first because you never know when this is going to come up in your class. And so I've invited, David, have a seat. I've invited people from academic support, which is she'll tell you, but she deals with students with special needs of all kinds, physical, learning disabilities, and so on. And I invited Kristen Pope, who's coming from the TRIO grant, and many of your students will be in that TRIO grant program, and so we can find out a little bit more about what that is about. It's kind of new to all of us. And then I invited David Qualiana, and he brought his cohort.
Yeah, this is Steve Knapp.
Steve.
Yep.
From the Counseling Center. Again, another service that's offered on campus for students, but has a lot of technical sort of requirements. So we'll start with Kristen and TRIO.
Thank you. So I'm Kristen Pope. I am the academic coordinator of what we call LEAP, the Learn, Engage, Achieve program. As Carolyn mentioned, it's a TRIO grant-funded program. We received the grant last fall and began with our first group of students this past January. So this fall we have our first freshman class, and so we are excited to have them and to try to figure out what that exactly means and all of that. So our program, I think these other folks are going to talk more about broad scope programming that serves the whole campus. Our program only serves 140 students, which compared to the whole campus population is pretty small, though I see them everywhere. So it feels like there's 700 or 800 of them, but it is only 130 something really right now. So it's a subset. Trying to think about what you guys would want to know. So we TRIO programs serve first generation college students, more narrowly defined as neither parent had a 4-year college degree. So they can have some college, an associate's degree, but just not a bachelor's level or higher is one criteria to be in our program. Another is a low income background, and that's defined more broadly than poverty line. So for like a family of 4, it's around $36,000. So, and it's a funky tax number, so people sometimes qualify, surprisingly so, for that variable. The third is a student can have a disability, and one of those 3 criteria makes someone eligible to apply for our program. And most of the students in our program, 2/3 of them have to be 2 of the 3 criteria. So most of our students are first generation and low income is primarily the population we're serving. So I expect that when you hear that, you have sort of some preconceived notions about what that might look like. You know, you might be thinking of a student you've met, like, oh, that's this student, you know. So I wanted to spend a minute to talk about that because I think that's one of the interactions we have with faculty pretty frequently. So we'll get faculty who say, hey, I have a student who'd be great for your program, and actually they're a terrible fit for our program. And so I thought it would be good for us to just talk about that for a minute. One thing I'd like to point out is like 54% of Lee students meet one of those 3 criteria, okay? So we serve 140 students, but over 2,000 students here at Lee qualify, okay? It's most students. So that's who our program is. It's most students. It's not low GPA. It's not, you know, about to leave school. It's a Lee student is who we serve. So we're looking for students for our program who are highly motivated and who have potential. Okay, so when you're thinking about students who might be a good fit for us, they need to probably have those 2 things. So someone who is on their very last leg, unfortunately, we're probably not the service that's going to help keep them here. We have pretty high objectives we have to meet for the government standards and, you know, so forth. And so it doesn't, unfortunately, allow us to serve the most struggling student. We certainly do have students who are struggling academically, but by and large, our students have average GPAs. We have some students who are Centennial Scholars, which if you know what that is, it's you're super smart and we're giving you a lot of money to be here scholars. So we really range the academic spectrum. Common themes are my parents love me, but they didn't go to college, so they don't know what I'm doing here, and they don't understand that I have homework on the weekend, and they don't know what financial aid is. So those are some of the things that we see as something we can help educate students on. People from low income, they're just struggling to pay their bill, and while we offer a small scholarship, we can do education and talk about budgeting and connect them with financial aid and some things like that. So sort of broad picture. Specifically, some of the core components of our program, the most central component is what we call coaching. So all of the students in LEAP are assigned a coach in the office. So I'm a coach. The director of our program, Suzanne Holt, is also a coach. Andrew Waltrip, the community coordinator, is a coach in addition to 2 grad students. So there are 5 of us that serve those 140 students. And we meet with them once a month. When we first meet a student, we do kind of a risk assessment, interview kind of thing to get to know students. Then in our first session every semester, we complete something called a learning contract. And it is a holistic success model. I have just an example of what that looks like here. So it's a 1-page piece of paper that has academic engagement, personal development, financial and economic literacy, career exploration, and cultural enrichment. So those are broadly things we're going to talk about with students, and the students can then select within each of those categories different activities. So they might say, man, my biology class is kicking my butt, I need tutoring. Okay, if you want to commit to tutoring, you can do that. Or, I just am feeling a little alone on campus, I really want to get involved. There's a place on that where a student can commit to campus involvement in various ways. So those are some of those examples. So again, we meet with them. The other thing that we do is we set a goal with them at the beginning of the semester. We always say, this is for you, this isn't your contract. What do you want to see yourself accomplish this semester that you want someone to talk to you about every 4 weeks? So we set that goal and then very specific action steps to help them try to get there. And there's pretty powerful conversations to have with students when you can kind of carve out that time just for anything that they need. I had a student that I met with actually Friday he's a freshman feeling very disorganized. And when he left, he got up from my desk and said, I feel so much better now. I said, why do you feel so much better? He goes, I don't think I'm going to fail anymore. And literally 2 weeks into school is already feeling so overwhelmed about all of the things he has to do and all of the changes between high school and college that had started to enter his mind as a possibility. And just to have someone talk through with him what a planner is and how to organize, there's a few small tips, was enough to make him feel sort of embraced a little bit. So it's pretty central to what we do is the coaching. Another component for our freshmen and sophomore, we have a peer mentoring program. So they meet with a peer mentor as freshmen and sophomore once a week outside of a class time, just to be a touch point, a peer, to advise them, to encourage them, that sort of thing. We also do a lot of workshops. So you'll see our flyers all over campus now that you've heard the term LEAP. We have like 40-something workshops this semester that we're offering to our students and broadly to the campus community. Anyone's welcome to attend those. Our students, because through their learning contract, have to contract a certain numbers of them and that kind of thing. I think the other piece to talk about is we have a tutoring component for some of our courses. So if people are in the remedial math courses or Math 101, they have a mandated tutoring component. And then kind of a sideline, non-mandatory, but we in the freshman and sophomore year try to put our students in learning clusters or learning communities of some kind. You can define that very differently, lots of ways you can define learning community. But we try to put them in some courses together. They're not LEAP exclusive courses. So for instance, we try to put them together in a small cluster in the Bible sequence, all 4 of those courses. The Psych, Soc, Econ pocket of the General Education core, if you're familiar with that, we try to cluster people there. And the Humanities course, History and Political Science, that pocket of the Gen Ed as well, in addition to English and Math. And we see that as an opportunity for group tutoring if the students want it. We entertained the notion, honestly, about making that mandatory and backed off of that when students don't like to be forced to do things. They like to choose things if they need it. So we see it as an opportunity for organic studying to happen through peers in the class that they're familiar with, to create maybe a little extra comfort there, and again, the opportunity for some additional tutoring if they need it. So that's a little bit about our program. Did any of you guys have questions about that? Yeah.
Are you their advisors?
Great question. We are not an advisor. We are listed on their degree audit as a secondary advisor below their primary advisor. And that gives us access to, then we get the birthday announcement, we get drop ad announcements. Because of that learning community piece, I look at all of those degree audits and make sure we're sort of putting them where they need to be in terms of those courses. So let me just say a couple more things about that. If you are an advisor to a LEAP student, you'll receive an email from me just prior to advanced class selection saying, hey, you have these LEAP advisees. We've pre-registered them in sociology. If this conflicts with what they need for their major, it's going to keep them from graduating, please let us know. Let's work with you and figure out a better solution. So like with the Bible 110 course, we might have 3 sections kind of labeled in terms of our internal working as LEAP, but you're not going to know that. So that's sort of an opportunity for us to dialogue and figure out, is there another class that we could put this student in so that everyone is getting the needs met on that level. Yeah.
Could we get a copy of that spreadsheet?
Which one?
The classes that are unofficially labeled as LEAP
Yeah,
students.
in the spring semester, we presented that to the deans and chairs. We gave it to them to then pass down to faculty is how that happened in the spring.
It's coming spring.
That's how it happened this past spring. So I expect that we'll be doing that same thing again this fall.
Would you tell me again, please, what LEAP stands for?
Learn, Engage, Achieve program.
Thank you.
The other thing that would involve people in the room is if you have a LEAP student in your class, like we do for athletes, we'll be requesting midterm grades. So you'll see that request come out from Kathy Thompson around the midterm, asking you to report midterm grades for our students. And you'll get a roster at that time of who those students are. Anything else?
What's the criteria that you use to select them?
So it's been different because if we have a current student population and then incoming students, and so you have different data points on each group. For our currently enrolled students had to have a 2.2 GPA. They have to meet 1 or 2 at least of the first gen low income disability criteria. We can't bring seniors into our program, so if someone was a senior that took them out of the running. In the LEAP application, there's a small, essay's too strong a word, there's like a 250 word, why do you want to be successful here at college kind of essay that we can look at. So those are some of the primary things.
So they self-select into it, or apply for it?
Yeah, they have to apply. So we can pull a large data set and email people and say, hey, you might qualify, please apply. But the application doesn't, anyone can access the application, and then we just go through those. Yeah. In January, we'll probably be bringing on about a dozen or so students. So it's not a huge number that we'll be bringing on, but there will be several slots for a January start class. So, if you see someone who you think fits some of those criteria, then you can refer them or have them access that application.
What kind of financial help do they get?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So our students all receive a $1,000 scholarship. Freshmen and sophomore receive that scholarship in the spring only. So, and then juniors and seniors receive it $500 in the fall and $500 in the spring. So it's a little bit wonky, but it's $1,000. Just the way it's distributed is different depending on classification.
Where would the application be?
It's in Portico. We also have a website, so it's theuniversity.edu/LEAP, and from that there's a link that will take a student directly to that page on Portico.
Okay, let's move on to Mrs. Bradford, Dr. Bradford, I should say.
She says it like that because I'm a newlywed.
She's a newlywed.
tomorrow's my 1.5-year wedding anniversary. First time married. So I'm thankful to the Lord for answering prayers for both of us. I am Dr. Bradford. I'm Lawan to all of you. And to your students, I'll be Dr. Bradford. Lawan is a different name. I'll tell you the history of that story if you ever want to know. My office has 3 parts. The part that will impact everybody on campus is that we do have a free tutoring program at Lee. It is peer tutoring. So we select our tutors by your help. The students who are sophomores or higher, have a 3.0 GPA, earned an A in a class that you recommended they can tutor for us. We pretty much kind of focus on the core. It starts to get hard to find senior level tutors because they all graduate. We want that to happen. And it becomes difficult to find junior level because they're busy doing internships. But we can pretty much hit the 100, 200, early 300 level with your help. So students come to us and we let the students do peer one-on-one tutoring for free, 2 hours a week per subject. So they can get 2 hours of history, 2 hours of music, culture, 2 hours of piano lab, and we have all kinds of tutoring opportunities for these students. And that's how we need your help. If you get that green sheet from a student needing your information, a thumbs up or thumbs down, please get that back to us. We can't guarantee, but we try. The second piece, and really the most important in my opinion, is that we serve students with documented disabilities. Now the reason why I introduced this tutoring first is because I try to neutralize my office to freshmen and incoming students. We serve all 5,000 students. If you come, let us give you a tutor. And I am proud to say that 20% of our campus, over 1,000 students a year, come to us some way for tutoring. So that's 20% of our campus. I am proud of that. And Chris Conine, I knock on his door a lot for money to make sure that continues. So it is good for the tutors because it's good for their resume and it's good for the people getting tutored. The second piece, as I said, is to serve students with documented disabilities, and I keep using that word documented because they have to have documentation to get accommodations. And I want to pass out to you a blank accommodation form that you might see or you might have already seen, and I just want to address this with you. Oh, sorry, Carolyn, thank you.
Terrible at these things.
That's what I'm doing.
Sorry. She's the hostess, not me. When a student comes in with documentation regarding their disability, I will review it and I will decide what their accommodations will be. When I decide on their accommodations, it depends on how current the documentation is, how severe the disability is, and I have a form, a checklist to kind of help me go a little bit faster. We're not limited to these things, of the accommodations that they qualify for. And then I also have to keep track of what their disability, that's an Uncle Sam word according to Americans with Disabilities Act, what disability has, what their diagnosis is. I have to keep track of that. But on the form you have, I want you to notice, it does not give you the opportunity to know what their disability is. That's private. My little logo, academic support, lets you know that there is a disability. I have reviewed the documentation and you are required to do what's on here. So I only put the things that impact you. For example, if a student qualifies for digital books, audio books, I'm not going to let you know about it because it doesn't impact you. It's none of your business. No offense, but it doesn't impact your job. So we only put things on here that will make an impact on you. Okay, so usually, those of you who have seen this before, what is it usually? Yep, to the top. Extended test time in our testing space and a note taker. Those are the top 2 that we usually see. And there's other things on here, just means we have other accommodations we need to make sure that they do, and I need your help to serve them best. So what if note taking is on here? First of all, I'm back up. If a student gives this to you, they're supposed to see you in your office. That's what they're recommended to do, and not just stick it, on the podium as they're walking out the door. This is for you. They're supposed to talk to you in their office. That's what I always tell them. And I always make them repeat back to me, now where are you going to take this? And they always say, at the doctor's office hours. And now whether or not they do that, I see heads going back and forth. They don't do that. Sorry, they've been told.
We appreciate front verifying.
You're welcome. If it says extended test time, let me just back up. This is just an FYI to you that they're an academic support student, to kind of keep you on the radar a little bit, keep them on your radar, I should say. If they want to take the test with us, it really is their responsibility to give you a 2-day ahead of time heads up. Because they might not want to take the test with us. They might just want to take their Spanish and math test with us, but they want to take Old Testament history with you. It's really up to them. We give them the wheels, they drive. So they have to tell you 2 days ahead of time, hey, Dr. So-and-so, I'm going to be taking my test in academic support. It becomes your responsibility to send it to us, snail mail or email, or walk it over, however you want to deliver it. Snail mail, email, walk it over. But we will deliver it back to you. We got a golf cart. Did I tell you this? Praise! So we deliver, I know, we deliver tests to you. We have a system, if you're not there, we slip it on your door and we send you an email. It's under your door to make sure tests aren't lost. So we'll deliver it to you if you have to deliver it to us. And we try really hard to get it back the next day if possible, because we know you're grading things. We want to grade them all together. Note taking, how does that work? Well, by now, if you get this form, you should know who's been faithful about attending class and who's been alert and who's not been dozing off. So you can say, hey, Sally, this is Bob. Bob, Sally will need a copy of your notes. Do this in a kind of quiet setting before a bunch of students are all the way around. And then 2 of them decide where to get the copies. That's all you got to do. But if it were to be day 1, let's pretend it's day 1 and you don't know who's who, then you would be responsible to make an announcement without using the student's name. Okay, repeat that to somebody. Without using the student's name. Without using the student's name. Hey, I have a student who needs a copy of notes. If you're willing to share, let me know if you don't mind. And then go on with your lecture. And whoever volunteers, you introduce them like you would if you knew them. And then sometimes they just find their own note taker. And they just know somebody in class, and they just get a copy of their notes. The other thing that's pretty common is to record lectures. So let's talk about that one. I like to pick on, lovingly, my Christian ethic teacher friends. So Christian ethics is an interesting class because they do some debating in there, right? Is abortion right or wrong? Is marriage right, divorce right or wrong? That kind of getting the students to think, not what mom and dad think, but their Christianity, their walk. So if a professor, and you know your topics, which are kind of debatable, what you don't want on social media. So if you say, hey, Sally, Billy, for this lesson, please don't record. I'll make sure you get a good copy of somebody's notes. That's okay. Now, it can't be the whole semester, though. Okay? If that's their accommodation, you need to let them record the parts that aren't questionable, possibly, if it got in the wrong hands. Does that make sense? So those are the ones that are the most common, I do believe. When they get extra test time, they take the test with us the same time your students are taking the test with you. So if your class is 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday, guess we're there with us, even if it's right before spring break, 8 o'clock on Friday morning with us. The only time that's not true is if they have a back-to-back class. So let's just pretend that they have a 9 o'clock class and a 10 o'clock class. Well, 9 o'clock class, they come at 8 to get their extra time. No big deal. 10 o'clock, they stay till they get that extra 30 minutes, and they're done. But what if they have a 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock? 9 o'clock, they come at 8. 11 o'clock, they stay till 12:15 to get their extra time, but that 10 o'clock, they can't help it. So I'm not going to expect them, neither should y'all, right, to make them miss the class before or after. So as soon as they can have that extra space to get that extra time, then they will come on that same day. But they're supposed to tell that to you as well. And these are their responsibilities to share with you. If you have questions about this form, give me a call. They sign a form understanding that I will talk about this with you and will not go digging in their file with you and sharing you what their documentation says and what their diagnosis is. But I can talk about this form with you. The most interesting one is the calculator for math teachers, and we have to negotiate with that. And I feel like I have a good relationship with the math science people to negotiate what's accurate, and all goes back to what's in your syllabus. That's why the curriculum committee is so important. Whatever your goals are and objectives on that syllabus, if it doesn't impede that, then we might have to consider some of these more, significant accommodations. but we can talk about that more in the cafeteria. If we all get free lunch pass if you park off campus. So I'd be happy to do that. Our campus is growing, and this is a beautiful thing, but this is my year 8. And so I feel like I'm losing track of names and when people came. So I would love to sit with you and your mentor maybe for lunch if you have some specific questions. And does anybody have a question for me? Yes, ma'am.
I know that you ask for nursing students to come help with the peer tutoring,
Yeah.
but the AU requirement, especially in pharmacology, is difficult.
Okay.
I think there might not have been one.
That's a great point. So if a professor, even with a B or B plus, recommends them to us, we take the professor's word. It's just a standard. We want a high achiever.
We discussed that as a
Okay,
group, but
good.
that needs to be there. for
Absolutely.
people.
That's fine by me. And lots of times, what I have found, particular in pre-med nursing and music majors, those are such heavy majors that their core kind of gets kicked to the curb. So you might want to encourage those majors, hey, at least get a tutor for Bible. That way, 2 hours a week, at least you're working on it with somebody. 2 hours a week, and maybe never more because you're so focused on your heavy practicing and things outside of the classroom. So push that too. But yeah, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
So, Lawan, when does your office offer the testing services? So a student
Oh, yeah.
can maybe make up an exam or
Thank you
retake
for
an
that.
exam?
We thank you for that. Our testing facilities, we have. I wish you could. I invite you all to come take a look. It's like a fish in a fishbowl because we have windows everywhere. We can watch them. We have we have videos, and we have the video monitor to make sure there's no cheating. As much as possible, these guys are sneaky, and we caught one over Christmas, and so we let the professor know, of course. But as far as if they're not an academic support student, I ask you, I have ADD, will you please give me extra time? Send them to me. We need to be unionized even on this. Because if you're giving accommodations and somebody else isn't, that's not fair. That's giving the wrong message. So they need to have this sheet for accommodations. But athletes who missed because of a game, grandma passed away, so they're at a funeral. We do allow makeup tests in our facility. It's Mondays, Wednesdays, 3 to 5, and Tuesdays, Thursdays, 8 until chapel. So please do not send it. They don't have this form, and you believe they really do have ADD because they're so crazy in your class. That's not what you're supposed. They have to have this form to get disability accommodations. But if they're an athlete or missed because of the flu or grandma passed away, they went to the funeral, then those makeup hours are possible.
And so what do we need to do, just call you or email you, because I do need to do it next week.
Then you tell the student. That's a great question. Y'all tell the student to come make an appointment with us so we can make sure we have space in the testing room, and then you send us the test, what time and what day.
So does the test, is it issued at the same time as the other classes, before or after? Can it be?
As much as possible, the same time as they're taking. If they're 8 o'clock on Friday, then they're with us 8 o'clock on Friday.
Okay, because I have a student who's taking it a day in advance this week, so I've got to test it on
They're not
Wednesday.
supposed
Actually,
to.
should have taken it today.
They're not supposed to. We'd rather it be the same time to keep from cheating happening. Because if they take it before, they could tell their friend what they just had on the test. And if they take it a day after, their friend can tell what was on the test. So that we encourage professors as much as possible to require it like we do the same time. Unless there's a conflict, right? 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, you have to let them take it later on that same day.
Or missing because of athletic events or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Just curious, what about quizzes? Because this is the first time for me, and I've been here.
Quizzes are allowed extra time. So if it's a 10-minute quiz, then they would the most common accommodation is time and a half. So they would get 15 minutes. So this
Would
is
they
when
come to your office?
this is something you and the student discuss. I tell the students they have to discuss quizzes with the professor. If you're going to lecture afterwards, then you need to let the student know, hey, I'm going to be lecturing at 8:15. Class starts at 8. At 8:15, I'll lecture. So you're going to have to take that quiz the day before if it's 8 o'clock in the morning class or in that day, and you and the student negotiate. Sometimes it's just better for the student to come to your office 15 minutes earlier and take it in your office.
Well,
Quizzes.
that's what I actually did. I was just wondering.
Yeah, that's allowed
Yeah.
because you're giving the extra time in a quieter setting for that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that makes pop quizzes. So if you give pop quizzes, you don't have to stop giving pop quizzes, but you and the student have to figure out a system because you have to be part of this. If you want a pop quiz, the way I had last year, this particular professor didn't mind sharing her phone number, so she would text a student, "Pop quiz today, go to academic support, it's ready for you." So that you have to decide how you're going to do pop quizzes if you want to do them.
We haven't had the situation yet, but talking here, we give 2 hours to take general chemistry exam. That exam is written as about an hour and 10-minute exam. So are we already giving a documented student extra time by giving 2 hours, or is 2 hours, it's more
Whatever
time
you're
beyond
giving.
the normal class setting?
So if you're giving the normal class setting, any person without any type of disability 2 hours, you would need them to get the extra hour. So we close at 5.
Regardless of how long the test is or how short it is, or?
Well, that's how my understanding of it is. We can
Okay.
talk about it. I have no problem talking about it with professors. I would need to look at the syllabus and whatever the requirement is. But if whatever you're giving standard wise to everybody, they get time and a half. We do close at 5. So if your class is from 4 to 5:15, then they would need to have that test. You can't just give it to us at 4 because we're not going to stay open for you. You know, we got things to do too. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's why we tell students give you 2-day notice so that you can get the test to us. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions. One, you were saying that it's our responsibility when we get this sheet to accommodate these, but they have to tell us what they want us to
Right,
accommodate, right? 'Cause
exactly.
one of my students had several things, but they only asked for extra time
Right,
on something.
right.
So then I don't have to worry about the rest,
Nope.
right?
This is a discussion starter. So it's totally okay to say, will you be using all of these? And just pause and let them tell you what they want, they don't want.
They email
Yeah.
me. So.
Okay, that's
And then,
fine.
I noticed today one of my students who has on there a note taker was just sitting there. Should I ask him, would you like me to recommend somebody by email? Should I ask this student?
If you want to, that's fine. Some students, they're freshmen, so they're so new at this, and they haven't had to do this before. Their special ed teacher and mama did it before. So let's give them a little bit of hand holding. Say, hey, I noticed note taking's on there. Would you like me to help you find someone? Have you already found somebody? I think that'd be really kind.
And then lastly, I have 2 students who said they were going to contact you because we give one exam from 5:30 to 7:30.
I know about that one. Yeah.
Okay, and so they were going to take it.
They need to take it before the office closes that same day. As long as their schedule allows it, they won't miss any classes. They would get usually 3 hours. Sometimes if it's a severe disability, there's also a hand disability, they get double time. But most students it's time and a half.
Okay. Well, these students aren't with disability. They just said they work at that night.
Oh, that's up to you. That has nothing to do with me. If you want them to take it during, I guess we could allow you to let it be taken during our makeup hours.
Okay, because they said they did this before, and I'm brand new, so I don't know what before.
Who's your mentor?
Say it again.
Who's your mentor? Okay, I would talk to your mentor.
He can't even pass out paperwork.
Questions though I can answer.
Yeah.
Is this a paper they should have already given to us?
No, actually, so I haven't seen everybody yet. Can you believe that? We're already in about to hit week 4 tomorrow, so I haven't seen everybody yet. We have so many new students, so no. And on top of, it's up to them when they give it to you. We give them the wheels, they drive. So if they don't want to self-disclose yet, that's up to them. So they can really give it to you when they want. Lots of times what happens is they fail the first test and then they, okay, I gotta have extra time the next test. Or they forget or they're trying to fill you out. They really have the right to decide when and where they use these accommodations.
But they can't just give it to me right before the test.
No, because we need 2 days. We need 2 days to
And
get the
you do
test.
encourage, especially ours, to do this, right?
Oh yeah, I
Okay.
encourage all
Because
students.
I have one who did it, and then
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we're not
Bad.
responsible
Yeah.
until they present this.
And my suggestion is always to professors, you kind of because this is yours, you keep it. I would put a date and time of when they gave it to me is what I would do.
because I expected it
It's up to them. They don't have to self-disclose.
Okay.
Because what is this saying? This is saying, I have a disability. Let's just think about that for a minute. It's a lot to expect somebody to tell their teacher, right? Because you're going to write the letters of recommendation. What do you think about this? What's your background? It is a little bit intimidating to give this to professors because you're self-disclosing. So I think that we need to give them a little bit of, understanding of not wanting right away maybe to let you know. And kind of get a vibe of you, what kind of teacher you are, if they're going to need the extra help. So, yeah, I encourage them to, but it's up to them.
I know we're almost out of time. I want to throw out one more thing. I had a student in my class this morning who broke her right arm. We have a test on Thursday. So she also deals with people who have part-time disabilities, short-term disabilities.
Temporary.
So, yeah, temporary, that's good.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
she is gonna take it in her office during those hours for makeup tests.
Yeah. Yeah, with all these rugby players and concussions, believe me, we have temporary accommodations. And it will say it's a similar but different form, temporary, tells you exactly when.
Okay, let's move on to David.
So, Steve and I want to talk to you a little bit about the counseling center. And if you walk out of here today thinking that all we do is therapy, psychotherapy, that kind of thing, you're missing part of what our message is. But the reality is, most of our time during the week is spent doing counseling with the students. It is free to anybody enrolled at Lee, and it's confidential, and it's more along a psychotherapy type of lines when you think of the word counseling as opposed to career counseling or something along those lines. But what we wanted to try to talk to you guys about today is some of the other stuff that we do as a counseling center, especially trying to consult to and support and educate you guys about psychological factors that might be in students' lives, and all the ways in which psychology and mental health might apply to students' lives in a way that doesn't necessarily mean that they ought to be coming to the Counseling Center for counseling. So,
my name's Steve Knapp. I work in the Counseling Center as well. So I like that we're kind of the third option here. It's kind of makes it a little interactive. I know it's kind of the end of the day, so I want you guys to reflect for just a few seconds on what would you consider your greatest accomplishment in life? Think about that. So now hold on to that. I'm going to come back to that. I want to tell a story about someone called General Stockdale. I don't know if some of you are familiar with him. His story is prominent in the book Good to Great. He was a prisoner of war, and he was remarkable in his strength and his ability to be able to withstand any sort of torture that they tried to get information out of him. So he was obviously a source of great strength, and so after the war, they came to him and said, "How did you do this? What did you do?" And he said, "I had a hope that I would be able to get out of that I would eventually be able to succeed." So he had this unwavering hope, and so the person talking to him asked him, and they said, "So now, who didn't really do too well? Sounds like you had this hope, so I would imagine Optimus would do pretty well." And he said, "No, actually Optimus did the worst." The reason why they did the worst is because he has this paradox called the Stockdale paradox, and so that first part of the paradox is he had a hope that he would succeed, that he would be able to persist. But he said the optimist did the worst because the second part of his paradox is that he confronted the reality of the situation, no matter how harsh it may have been. Optimists would be very hopeful that they were going to get out next week. They would get out a month from now. And when it didn't happen, they would get to a place of despair. But without that hope, people are already in a place of despair, and they didn't have any sort of belief that things were going to succeed, and so they just gave up. And so he realized that he had to keep this paradox in tension with one another. So why am I talking about this? Why did I ask you what your greatest achievement was just even a few minutes ago? I would tend to say, at least probably in most cases, your greatest achievement had these two elements. Whatever it was, you had hope that you could succeed. But it wasn't a blind hope. It wasn't a wish, but it was something that you had the harshest reality as well. You knew how hard it was going to be. There may have been times where you lost hope for a second because it was so difficult. But you knew how tough this task was throughout. And you continue to persist, and you hold these two in tension. Again, why am I talking about this? 7% roughly of the student population will come to the counseling center at some point this semester, which means 14 out of 15 students never actually come and see us. They see you guys. And one of the big problems that we see is that students are becoming less and less resilient. And so this is kind of a principle to kind of get gears turning for you guys to see, how can I help my students become more resilient? And this paradox is one simple way to help them do that. That the simple wish that you've never been good at math, so hey, maybe you'll just do well this time, probably isn't going to work too well. But confronting the reality of the situation, say this is going to be tough for you, that we might have to learn a little bit different way. But let's have hope that you can be good at math, or whatever your subject is. And so helping students become more resilient, one thing I want to plug is a week from today we're going to do a resilient event that's going to make things more practical. So it's next Tuesday at 7 o'clock over in the education building. Trying to encourage as many students to come to help develop this resilience. But even for the common student who doesn't need therapy, I think they can all develop a little bit more resilience. And so I would encourage you guys to think of those ways of, how have I been resilient in my life? How can I share this story with students that might resonate with them? And how can I help draw this out in them in some way?
Yeah, and I think I like the way that Luan gave her presentation with some degree of kind of narrowing levels of student need. And when we think about the psychological factors in students' lives, at the broadest level, every student that we have is developing and is going to face some sort of challenge while they're here. And most of the data on generational research and generational differences shows that this generation of college students is more likely to struggle with resilience, to have expectations that are maybe unrealistic about the amount of difficult work, challenges, opportunities for failure and success that are going to face them. They're going to see that differently, maybe not have the accurate expectations. And so when they face challenges in your classes or in the dorms or in their personal lives, they're more likely to see those events that maybe you guys know more than the students do. You know that they're inevitable. You know that they are uncomfortable, but they're opportunities for growth and development. These students are more likely to see them as threats to their identity, to their existential beliefs, that kind of thing. And so we all have an opportunity to invest in these students' lives in a way that helps them develop holistically. And from a psychological angle, we would love to consult with you guys and figure out from you, what are the psychological factors in the students' lives, in the nursing program, in the School of Music, wherever else it is, so that we can provide kind of some specific psychological consultation to how you are mentoring these students. We're not asking you to do counseling with them. We're not asking you to spend any additional time with the students, but to be intentional in thinking about what the psychological development of your students looks like and how you're contributing to it rather than being an obstacle. Now, I think there are other students that you may identify as needing extra forms of support, and that might be the student care committee, it might be us, it might be them, and you might have to collaborate with somebody on campus where these students are extra specially at risk, or you're starting to see them fall apart or something like that. And we'd be happy to consult with you guys on those students as well. And then I think there is a smaller group on campus who they're going to need some ongoing support from the counseling center, from professionals who do psychotherapy or assessment or the medication services we provide. And we want to help make sure you guys know how to identify those students and what kind of conversation to have with them to help get them interested and willing. Because if they just get shoved through our door and they're not personally invested, even if anxious, probably not going to stick it out. But if they can be enticed into the idea that counseling isn't just for crazy people, and the fact that I walk through that door doesn't mean I'm not a strong enough Christian, or some of the other stigmas that are out there. I think it'll help them be willing and able to see that, of course, we all face challenges. There's only two kinds of people in the world. You've got people who face challenges and they're in denial, or they turn to rugged individualism and just try to flex their muscles really hard. And then there's people who have challenges and they're not in denial, and they are aware that those challenges need to be acknowledged and understood and faced. And very often, not on our own, with the support of other people. Dependence is one of the aspects of God's creation that's most beautiful about human beings. And I think it's one of the most beautiful things about Lee's campus as well, the way that we can depend on community. So consider us part of your community. Yeah, we're part of the community for the students who need counseling with us, but we want to be able to be a psychological resource to you, whether it's proactively teaching you some stuff about psychological factors and resilience and things like that, or whether it's reactively, if you've got a crisis going on with your students, if you need to consult about something you personally are going through or your family, we do one-time consults to help people figure out what resource they need. We don't do counseling and therapy and assessment in any of our formal services for staff and faculty, unless they're enrolled in classes, and then that kind of works. But we do serve all the students who are enrolled in the university. How do you access us? Check out our website. Eventually check out our Portico site. It's like really behind, and we don't have a lot of our good resources there. How do the students access us? 4 out of the 5 days a week, we've got an hour and a half set aside, and it's on our website when we have walk-in times. Whether the students need a one-time consult with us or they need to do an intake in order to set up ongoing therapy with us at that time, we're ready to do that with them at that time. We do have some additional staff members, so hopefully you'll hear less buzz this year about waitlist and then all the kind of hilarious rumors that go around about that as well. Like, oh, the counseling center is not doing intakes anymore, and they're just not taking on any more clients. When we have a wait list, yeah, we have a wait list, but we're always offering them multiple options, either while they wait for individual therapy or alternative services, something like that.
And we will always do an intake with them.
Yeah.
Always. Doesn't matter what's going on, we will meet with them, figure out what is going on, and help them get the resources that they need, even if it's not us, because if we don't have the capacity.
And crisis services too. I mean, if you're not really sure what our policies are and you think some students in crisis, just contact us and say help, and we'll let you know what we think is the best route forward. We also brought a handout that you got.
Yeah, I want to tell a quick. To connect what Dave had been saying a few minutes ago about consultation, I think a good connection for that is just this morning I met with members of a Greek club about some depression and suicidal ideation that came out during induction. They let their sponsor know. Their sponsor contacted me on Friday, and I'm not saying it's going to be this quick, but this morning we met with them, we game planned, we helped empower them. And so that's a perfect example where just today a staff member actually reached out to me and said, hey, would you be willing to meet with my Greek club? They're dealing with some heavy stuff. They don't really know how to address it. And so that's one of the reasons why I love working here, is because I'm part of a broader community that can connect in ways that I never could, just meeting one-on-one with 15 to 25 clients. So please use us as a resource that is available in this community.
So the handout that we're going to pass out here has 2 different resources on it. One of them is more in that general sense of what psychological factors might be present in your students' lives, and what's an example of a campus response that isn't necessarily about therapy, but it's just about something you might do or pay attention to as you teach classes and things like that. So there's a summary at the top, then there's some examples of there's psychological factors with this generation related to increased parental dependence or increased dependence on you guys, perhaps, to find answers to questions that they have. There's some others in there about decreased conflict management skills, increased entitlement, that kind of thing. So those are psychological factors we've seen in this generation on the rise as an increase. And the other column is a little bit about what are some things that you might be able to think about or do in the way that you interact with students, not necessarily giving them more, but just more intentionally or differently. Then on the other side, is you do have students that you think might need some form of intervention, whether it's from you, from somebody else, or psychological counseling. There's a little bit of do's and don'ts about how to talk to that student. How do I bring up the conversation? What do I say or not say? How do I convince them to go? That kind of thing. And there's a whole bunch of pieces of advice for the best way to make that happen. To summarize all of it, if you are concerned about a student and you think that it needs to be brought to their attention, you might be recommending counseling or something like that. The best way to do that is in a curious, non-judgmental way that shows that you care and you want to relationally engage this issue with them. And yes, that does take time. And there is no simple cookie cutter way to respond to it because it depends on the student, where the issues are coming from, how accurate or inaccurate, how complete or incomplete your observations are, how resistant they are to receiving care. There's so many factors you can't predict ahead of time. So you have to engage the student well enough to perhaps understand a little bit about their needs and their relational dynamics. But if you're non-judgmental, if you share some of the basic behavioral details that you've observed rather than interpreting. Not, I think you're depressed, but I think I've noticed you've been missing class. I'm wondering why your grades are dropping. Those are concrete things that they can't really argue with. If you say, I think you're depressed, do you have an eating disorder? Do you have a trauma history? That's bringing up all these interpretations that may or may not be true, they may or may not be aware of, and they may or may not want to tell you. So if you're bringing up more data than interpretations, and you're doing it from that place of relational care rather than, so get it together. And if you need to, go to the counseling center to make that happen. Yeah. The more relationally engaging you can do, the better. So that's kind of us in a nutshell. We do a lot of individual therapy, group therapy, and couples therapy for students. But we love to be a psychological resource to anybody on campus with proactive outreach type work, whether it's to students or faculty and staff.
Can you tell us more about that resilience event that you said?
Sure.
Where is it?
The goal of the event is going to talk about resilience in general, why it's important, and then it'll give some real practical ways to be able to begin integrating resilience in their life. So, how to problem solve, how to set goals for yourself, how to avoid seeing problems as insurmountable. So these are just some examples of things that we'll make interactive, because we know just lecturing for an hour on a weekday night's probably not what they're interested in. And so trying to make it interactive, but trying to make it practical so that they can take some of these principles and begin applying it outside of the event.
Where is it going to be and how many will that room hold?
That's a good question. Normally we don't get a ton of people to come to our events, but it is in the Rose it's in the Rose Lecture Hall, so it's a decent sized room. What was your other question? When is it? Yeah, next Tuesday, 7 o'clock in the Rose Lecture Hall, which is the education building.
Which is where the faculty meeting was last week.
Theoretically, information about that is on the TVs, right?
Yeah, it should be circulating around campus, chapel slides, on our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter. There's a flyer if you guys want to print those off. If you want to offer extra credit,
we do not discourage
we will
offering extra credit for coming to our
We will,
events.
what we've done in the past is have them either we can sign a flyer for them to give back to you saying like, hey, they came, or they can tell us who their professor is and what their name is, and we'll just email you guys the next day. So we'll figure out a way to communicate that. But if it's important to you and you want to offer extra credit, we'll find a way to make that work.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Just curious, do you do any kind of like survey of freshmen? I know my children, when they were in elementary school, they surveyed all the 5th graders, and I could not believe how many had tried alcohol and had thought about suicide and so on. Do you ever do that more on the front end?
The data is out there for college students in general and for college students at university counseling centers. We don't often have the opportunity to do general surveys of the LEAP population. Some of that data is out there about LEAP students as well, whether it's a freshman, sophomore, or senior survey. But yeah, it's all out there somewhere. Are you curious about anything in particular?
No, I was just wondering, I mean, if you knew that, 28% of the population had a need to like hear, and then you could do a seminar, like on the paradox you were talking about earlier, and kind of drive it from the more of the proactive.
I could lecture for 3 hours on the data that exists just around resilience and generational change. We participate actually in a data collection source for university counseling centers that has hundreds of thousands of data points with different students, and they've been watching this over time. And it's not just the decreased resilience, but how that decreased resilience has resulted in about however many percent, I think it's like 12% increase in the number of people coming to counseling centers saying that they have significant cutting and non-suicidal self-injury issues, significant suicide attempts, or significant suicidal thought, including suicidal thought within the last month right before coming to counseling, which unfortunately also means that people who have indicated that stuff usually take about 25% longer in therapy to show any significant results too. So it's really increasing the burden on counseling centers, which is part of why we're pushing this resilience stuff, because if we have more students expressing need for more therapy, we want to catch them before they get to that and help them build skills to be preventative in these types of areas. So I could go on for 3 hours just on resilience, and I've got about 10 other factors that they've identified too. So.
We're leaving at 5, so.
Yeah. I'll be here till 8. I'll lock up when I go.
Other questions?
Is there any reasons that you've read that is contributing to the increase in, or decrease in resilience?
Just about anything and everything is multi-causal, multi-maintained. So there's not one smoking gun. But the stuff you hear about helicopter parents and parenting approaches, it's not untrue. It's not the whole picture, and it's probably exaggerated, but it's definitely not untrue in some of the ways that we're parenting and the expectations that we're creating as they're growing up through high school, definitely adding to it.
So helicopter parents, everyone gets a trophy.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. But then you also add in they are the first digital native generation, and there's a lot of other factors too. And then we also see people coming to college who couldn't have come to college a generation ago because the medications are better and because there's less stigma and more counseling. And so lots of factors, but parenting and environment and expectations are part of it. And that's part of what we've got on here as far as definitely just because they may have lower resilience and coping skills, do not lower your standards in class. But you might have to be more intentional about, here's why my standards are the way they are, and this is what I'm trying to help you develop, and challenges are okay. And so.
All your counseling is biblically based?
Yes, and there's a lot of different versions of biblically based. Some people practice what's called biblical counseling, and it argues that you primarily and only use Scripture and books about Scripture in order to offer counseling. And often that means that there's an expectation of a salvation experience in order to receive true healing. That is not our approach to counseling. There are certainly aspects of that we're going to value and utilize, but that's not our approach. I think you could describe us as spiritual integration, and a very brief way to describe that is we believe all truth is God's truth. So whether it's Sigmund Freud, Marx, or John the Baptist, if there's truth in it, we may use it to help us understand human nature from a psychological and a holistic angle, and not just human nature, but how we break, how we get fixed, and what that process of healing looks like. And so it's a pretty complex system of integrating things together. Ethically, we're not allowed to proselytize and tell people what we think the right answer is from a spiritual or belief perspective, but I wouldn't really want to do that anyways, because it pretty much disempowers the students. So spiritual integration, I would say, is our approach. Do I think that respects Christianity? Absolutely. I think it's the way God wants us to practice counseling. not, the more strict biblical counseling method that requires the use of biblical text as the primary source of insight and healing and stuff like that.
Our time is actually more than up. I'll give you 2 minutes off next time. Oh no, next time's Dr. Dawn.
Oh.
You're on your own.
Yeah, we don't want to stimulate that Dr. Khan.
Thank you so much.
You may be late.
Thank you guys.